Hi, I'm Rowena. I'm 65, and not too long ago, I came home to find my locks changed by my own daughter and her husband. They said it was for my safety, but that wasn't the truth, not even close. They did it so my late husband's sister could take my house, the one I built my life in, the one my husband died in. And the worst part? It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, through smiles, soft voices, forged documents, and silence. How does a mother become the outsider in her own family? Dinner with Melis and Brenner used to be a rare, warm event, maybe once every 2 months, if that. So when they invited me over that Thursday evening in late February, I should have known. The way Melis's voice lingered too long on the word mom, the overly sweet tone Brenner used when he asked if I liked sparkling or still. It wasn't hospitality. It was setup. Their house felt too quiet. The grandkids were always running around, leaving Legos and applesauce trails in their wake. But that night, not a squeak. Just the ticking of a clock I'd never seen before, and the faint scent of vanilla candles, like someone wanted it to feel like comfort. I sat at their dinner table, nodding politely as Melis passed a tray of roasted vegetables and started her pitch. "You should move in with us, Mom. You'd have company, daily meals. You wouldn't have to worry about falling and being alone." Her words spilled out smooth, too smooth. Brenner chimed in, throwing in phrases like estate optimization and financial efficiency. I blinked, realizing I wasn't being asked. I was being presented with a decision that had already been made. I kept my smile soft, but inside, everything tightened. I hadn't lost my hearing or my senses. I knew what they were doing, and I wasn't ready to play along. A few days passed before the next piece of the puzzle showed up. Literally, Isolde, my late husband's sister. I opened the front door to find her standing there with 2 suitcases and a breathing machine. "Just for a few days," she said. My living room rug shifted under my feet as I processed that. I hadn't invited her. No warning from Melis or Brenner. But how do you turn away a woman lugging medical equipment? I showed her to the guest room. "Thanks, dear," she muttered, walking in like she owned the place. I stood in the doorway too long, questioning why the sheets I just washed last week felt like someone else had claimed them now. The next morning, I stayed in the kitchen a little longer than usual. I traced the faded sunflower wallpaper, the one Leighton and I picked out during our first spring in the house. He wanted warmth in every corner, he'd said. Isolde had always thought it looked cheap. Yet here she was now, drinking coffee from one of my mugs, scrolling her phone, sitting in his chair. The kitchen smelled like almond lotion, hers, not mine. This wasn't a visit, it was a transition. Only I hadn't signed off on it. Later that week, Melis stopped by with a few boxes. "Just dropping off some baby things for a friend," she explained, too quickly. I nodded, half listening, until one of the box flaps fell open. Inside, monogram linens with ID stitched neatly in blue. Isolde Dorn, not baby things, her linens, her closet, her guest room. I followed Melis down the hall and noticed the guest room closet already rearranged. My storage boxes pushed into the corner. Her perfumes lined up like a declaration. I said nothing, not yet. But something broke inside me in that moment, not with fire, but with the clean snap of a bone. That evening, the house was quiet again. Isolde had gone to bed early. I opened the medicine cabinet to take my calcium pills and found my bottle. Gone. In its place, hers. The toothpaste had changed brands. Even my favorite teacup had been moved from the front of the shelf to the back. I pulled it forward and held it. My hand trembled, not from age, but from the realization that this wasn't just inconvenience. It was erasure, slow, strategic, and working. Needing air, I stepped outside onto the porch. The February breeze was damp, soft against my skin, reminding me of the early mornings Leighton and I used to drink coffee here. I stood there longer than I meant to, letting the quiet wrap around me. When I turned back toward the house and reached for the doorknob, something shifted inside me. I had locked that door. I always lock the door. But when I twisted the knob, it opened. I didn't speak. I didn't shout. I just stood there, hands still on the doorknob, looking into the house that had started to feel less and less like mine. And in that silence, I knew something had changed. Not just the lock on the door, but the locks they were placing around my life, one quiet step at a time. I couldn't sleep the second night after the lock was changed. I lay awake, playing the last month over and over in my head like a broken record. That's when I remembered the envelope. It had been a Tuesday afternoon, sunlight pouring through the blinds, the smell of black coffee lingering in the kitchen. Brenner had come by with a padded folder. Just routine tax stuff, he'd said, like it was no big deal. He tapped it with his index finger and added, "We're just updating some estate info. You don't have to read it. Just need your signature before we send it to the accountant." I remember feeling tired that day. It had been a long morning at the doctor's office, and the thought of reading anything legal made my head pulse. So, I trusted him. I didn't even take my glasses out of my purse. I signed. That memory sat like a lead weight in my chest now. The morning sun was barely peeking when I headed to a small print shop down the block. I brought the voicemail note Brenner had taped to my door and made 3 copies, one for me, one for a lawyer if needed, and one just in case something else went missing. I sat in my car afterward, holding the note between my fingers, wondering how long it would take for everything to be erased. The signature, the papers, my presence. I didn't read it because I didn't think I needed to, I whispered. That's the cruel trick of betrayal. It starts small. It starts inside trust. By mid-afternoon, I stopped by Enid's porch. She waved me up before I could knock. We'd shared more cups of coffee on that porch than I could count, especially since Leighton passed. "You okay?" she asked, squinting. I didn't answer right away. I just asked her a question. "Did you see anyone around my house last week?" Her lips pressed into a line. "Brenner and some guy were measuring around your porch," she said finally. "Maybe Tuesday. I figured you were planning renovations." Her eyes searched mine. I should have asked. I shook my head, not at her, but at the simplicity of it all. How easily their plan moved forward when no one suspected anything. "They didn't react," I said. "They planned." Back at my apartment, I poured a lukewarm cup of decaf and stared out the window for what felt like hours. My mind drifted past the signatures and the locks to Milas. She'd always been bright. Even as a kid, she had this way of getting what she wanted, not out of tantrums, but through sheer charm and calculation. I remembered her 8th birthday vividly. She couldn't choose between 2 cake designs. I was firm at first. Pick one. But she looked up at me with that tilt of the head, the exact same one she uses now, and I found myself ordering both. That day ended with too much frosting and a tiny lesson that I had taught her something dangerous, that love sometimes looks like surrender. I pulled out a dusty file box I'd stashed in the closet weeks ago. It was filled with insurance records, mortgage copies, even a few old Christmas cards tucked into the side pockets. I flipped through, not looking for anything in particular, but needing to remind myself of what was mine. I started taking notes, not on legal paper, but on a spiral-bound notebook from the dollar store. I wrote down everything I remembered signing, the dates, who was present, how it was framed. My memory was still sharp, and now I was going to use it. After dinner, I opened the hall closet, the one Brenner had used to file the accountant folder last time he visited. There it was, buried behind a box of tax return envelopes. One form remained, folded but not sealed. My breath caught, warranty deed transfer request. Type names, Rowena Dorn, Maya Lise, Dorn Sawyer. The signature, mine, or at least it looked like it. I lowered myself into the nearest chair. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stared at it the way a mother stares at a school notice she already knew was coming. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a slap across the face. It was paperwork. It was ink. It was trust, documented and used against me. They didn't steal the house last week. I handed it to them last month. 3 days after discovering what I had unknowingly signed, a text from Milas appeared like a mosquito buzz. Brief, irritating, impossible to ignore. Family meeting at our place. Just us. No stress. Those words weren't casual. They were rehearsed. I could feel it in the back of my throat, the way your body knows a fever is coming before the thermometer confirms it. I didn't rush. I changed into slacks and a cardigan I'd ironed the night before. I brought nothing with me but keys that no longer opened anything I owned. When I stepped into their house, it smelled like lemon cleaner and lavender, like someone wanted to scrub away guilt and replace it with calm. Malis greeted me with a smile that felt borrowed. Brenner barely looked up from his tablet. Isolde sat perched on the edge of the couch, sipping tea like she had lived there all along. I wasn't offered a seat. They didn't even pretend this was neutral ground. Miley started with soft tones, the kind you use when telling a child they can't keep the puppy they found. We love you, Mom. We really do. But we've been talking, me, Brenner, and Aunt Isolde, and we think it might be time for a change. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The script was already written. You've done so much for all of us, and we want to make sure you're taken care of. Milas continued, as if this was charity. A community facility would give you 24/7 support, social activities, meals cooked every day. It's honestly a blessing. Brenner added, and the house, it's just not set up for someone living alone, safety-wise. I opened my mouth. They kept talking. There's a great place just outside town, modern, clean, Mela said quickly. I closed my mouth. Isolde cleared her throat delicately. It's not that we don't want you here, Rowena. It's that this place needs new energy. No one said it, but I heard it. This wasn't about care. This was about control. They weren't offering help. They were writing me out of my own life. Milas pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. We're planning the baby shower here next week for Aunt Isolde, she said. She deserves to feel celebrated. My living room filled the screen. My curtains, my sofa, the mirror Leighton and I bought in Savannah. Above it all, a banner stretched across the mantel. Welcome home. For a moment, I couldn't feel my hands. My fingers twitched, useless in my lap. That house, my house, was already being treated like a venue. I was the event that had been moved off the calendar. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I took in their smiles, their nods, their orchestrated kindness. I became very still, not passive, calculated. I gave them nothing, no argument, no permission. I nodded once politely and stood. I drove in silence, the road humming under my tires. As dusk bled into night, I found myself detouring past my house. My headlights caught the edge of the lawn. The porch light was on. So were the living room lamps. Shadows danced across the curtains. People moving, laughing. They weren't waiting for me to move out. They had already moved in. They think I'm quiet because I'm weak. They've forgotten silence can be a decision. The morning after their so-called family meeting, Melis met me at the cafe near the pharmacy. She sat down across from me like it was a casual visit, something daughters did when they missed their mothers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She slid a white envelope across the table. Dad wrote this before he passed. We just found it in one of the old books. Her voice was soft, but every syllable felt rehearsed. I waited until she left before I opened it. The handwriting looked almost right, but not quite. It mimicked Leighton's slanted cursive, but the rhythm of the letters was off, too uniform, too clean. He always rushed the Y in his name, looped it once, never twice. The letter inside was brief, impersonal, painfully neutral. If you're reading this, Rowena, it means I've gone. I trust Melis to make the best decisions for the house and our future. Don't fight her. She knows what's best. I read it twice, then a third time. And by the fourth, I stopped pretending it was real. At home, I dug through the drawer in the hallway where I kept our anniversary cards and birthday notes. I took one from 1986. Leighton had written, "To my Row, who makes this house a home," and underlined home twice, as if daring me to forget it. His voice had warmth, humor, humanity. The letter Melis handed me felt like it had been written by someone who'd never met him. They weren't just stealing my home. They were forging my grief. I called her later that evening. She answered on the second ring. "You read it?" "Yes," I said. She was quiet, and then, "It's about what Dad would have wanted." My response came without pause. "Don't ever speak for him again." She exhaled, annoyed but composed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said, steady and final. "You are." A few hours later, I returned to my rental with a bag of groceries and a mind too busy to rest. Just as I stepped out of my car, I saw her, Melis, walking up the sidewalk in flats and a gray coat I used to wear. She looked unsure of herself for once. We stopped a few feet apart. The wind carried a silence. Neither of us seemed eager to fill. "Do you trust me, Mom?" she asked, suddenly, her voice trembling just enough to register. I looked at her. I thought of the couch that wasn't mine anymore, the scent of Isolde's lotion on my towels, the fake signature, the lock that turned too easily in my hand. I thought about that forged letter sitting in my trash can beneath a banana peel. "No," I said, "not anymore." For a second, she looked wounded, but then her lips curled, not in apology, but resignation, like she had expected it. "We were just trying to give you options, Mom. Don't make this harder than it has to be." She turned before I could answer, walking away with the same confident stride she had when she was 5, and had just blamed her cousin for breaking my vase. I didn't follow her. I didn't call out. I locked the door behind me when I stepped inside and closed the blinds. Then I sat at my dining table, pulled out my laptop, and opened my old Gmail account. I typed keywords: deed, transfer, power of attorney. My fingers were slower than they used to be, but my mind was as sharp as ever. They may have tried to take my foundation, but I still had my tools. I began to build a timeline. When Brenner first mentioned tax planning, when Malis asked for extra house keys, when Isolde showed up with her suitcases like she had a reservation, I saved every file. I bookmarked elder fraud case studies. I opened tabs for local attorneys. They want silence? I'll give it to them, just not the kind they're expecting. It started with a knock, not loud, not aggressive, just steady enough to make my stomach sink before I even reached the door. A woman stood there, holding a clipboard and a shoulder bag, her smile too professional to be kind. Mrs. Dorn, I'm Wendy from Elder Care Services. We've received notice from your daughter about your agreement to begin short-term supervised care. I blinked. Excuse me? She tilted her head, tone neutral but firm. You consented via email last week. We're here to confirm transportation and finalize the intake. I stared at her, trying to remember if I'd lost time, blacked out, or misplaced a conversation. But I hadn't. I hadn't agreed to anything. Can I see that email? I asked. Wendy pulled out a printed copy. My name, my email. The words I agree at the bottom. It looked official, clinical, detached. Everything I wouldn't be. I felt a chill across my arms. I didn't write this, I said. She hesitated. Well, the confirmation was time-stamped and logged. I'm not here to debate legality, ma'am, just to follow the protocol. Do you have a bag ready? I didn't answer. I closed the door on her and sat down in the kitchen. Not angry, just hollow. That evening, just before sunset, I saw a van pull up. White, unmarked, clean. 2 attendants in burgundy polos stepped out. Malis followed, holding a gray duffel. She wore her Sunday shoes and an expression I'd seen once before, when she lied to a teacher about forgetting her homework. Mom, she said, reaching for my elbow, we're just taking you somewhere restful, just for a few nights. I looked down. I was in my house slippers. I hadn't even put on real pants. The van door opened, and the inside smelled like pine and lavender and something else, something institutional. I didn't fight. I let them walk me out like I was someone's burden. But as I sat in the back seat, I memorized every turn we made. The facility was bright. That false kind of bright. Like someone had decided that pastel walls and big windows could make up for the fact that this was a place for people to be left behind. The receptionist greeted me like I'd checked in for a spa weekend. We'll just need to verify your medication list and emergency contacts. I smiled tightly. Don't worry, I won't be here long. They put me in a shared room with a woman named Joyce who hadn't spoken in 2 days. I wasn't like her. I wasn't like any of them. But that didn't stop the staff from treating me like I might forget my name any second. I asked questions. I wrote everything down. Who signed the transfer papers? Who approved the room? What name was listed as responsible party? It was Brenner's. That night, I used the facility's phone under the guise of checking in with my nephew. Instead, I called the bank. Can you verify recent activity on my account? I asked. The woman on the other end paused. Yes, ma'am. We've had 2 requests for a balance transfer. Voice confirmed. To where? To a joint account ending in 87112. Name on file. Malis Dorn Sawyer. My throat tightened. Did you say voice confirmed? Yes. You passed our voice print verification, so we processed the request as valid. I didn't say it, but I thought it loud enough to echo through my bones. My daughter had stolen not just my home, but my voice. I hung up, turned off the lamp beside my bed, and lay in the dark, listening to Joyce breathe beside me. I stared at the ceiling tile until the lines blurred and bled into one another. If they thought I'd lie down quietly, they clearly forgot who raised them. It took a full week in that place before I stopped being surprised by how easily I'd been removed. I was no longer angry in the loud, red-faced way I might have been once. I was angry like ice, solid, deliberate, unforgiving. So when I asked the facility's administrator to provide me a copy of the intake documents, I did it with a smile and a tone so polite it caught her off guard. She hesitated. "These usually go through the family," she said. I kept my voice steady. "I am the family." 2 days later, a copy appeared in a manila envelope outside my door. I read it at my small desk that night, beneath the flickering hallway light. My name was there, my address, my birthday, everything accurate except the most important part. The signature. It was shaky, too wide, too spaced out. I don't write like that. And the date, it was 2 days after my doctor doubled my medication dosage. I'd spent most of that week asleep. Brenner called the next morning, as if on cue. "Just checking in," he said smoothly. "How are they treating you?" "They serve mashed potatoes with an ice cream scoop," I said. He chuckled, like we were sharing a private joke. "It's peaceful though, right? It's not forever. Just until everything's more stable." "You mean until I stop being inconvenient?" "Come on, Rowena. You're still the matriarch, just in a different setting." I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch until he gave up and hung up. But I didn't forget a single word. I carried them around like matchsticks. That night, I waited until the nurse's station changed shifts. I borrowed the common use phone at the end of the hall and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Carla Vega had been one of my brightest English students, the kind who wrote courtroom speeches instead of poetry for homework. Now she was a paralegal for a firm downtown. "I need help," I told her plain and sharp. "Someone faked documents to put me here. I want to know what I can do." By the next afternoon, she called me back with 2 words that changed everything. Get evidence. I started with the one thing they thought I'd forgotten, an old bank account I'd kept open under my maiden name. I logged in from the recreation room's computer, surrounded by puzzle books and lukewarm coffee. There it was, 2 transfers, both approved by voice verification. But the IP address traced back to Melis's office, and the link device was hers. My heart didn't race. It settled. They hadn't just stolen my signature. They'd stolen my voice. I began collecting everything. Names of staff who signed my intake form, timestamps from visitor logs, medication schedules. I asked casual questions, dropped comments like breadcrumbs. I wrote it all down in a notebook I'd folded into the back of a Reader's Digest. And then I remembered something from weeks before. A file folder Brenner had slipped into my drawer, the one labeled Estate Review for Tax Prep. I hadn't touched it, but I remembered putting the real deed, my original, notarized, irreplaceable deed, in a lockbox Leighton and I had stored in our attic decades ago. I had copies of my handwriting from every birthday card I'd written Melis, every holiday note I'd sent since she went off to college. All of them looked like me. The signature on the forged deed did not. I stared at the photocopy Carla emailed me. Warranty deed transfer, dated 4 months ago. My name again, only it wasn't. They counted on my silence. They forgot I had time and nothing left to lose. The day I walked into that attorney's office, I wasn't wearing anything special. Slacks, a blouse with sleeves a bit too short, and shoes I'd polished the night before with a rag that used to be Leighton's undershirt. Nothing fancy, but I wore my name like armor. After weeks, in a place that tried to strip me of it, I carried every syllable of Rowena Dorn with deliberate weight. They didn't know I was coming. That was the point. Malis turned around first. Her expression cracked. Brenner blinked twice, like I was image that hadn't fully rendered. I didn't offer them a word, just walked in and handed a flash drive to the paralegal seated at the edge of the table. "You'll want to watch this," I said, and took a seat across from them, my name already engraved into the room by the very air I brought with me. The screen flickered to life. Enid's camera work wasn't smooth, but it was damning. There was Brenner, pointing at my porch with a clipboard. Malis, nodding, giving directions to the locksmith crew. Her voice, clear and saccharine. "Let's make this quick. She's not coming back today." No shouting, no excuses. They just stared, frozen in the truth. My hands didn't tremble. My breath didn't catch. I simply looked over at the notary and nodded once. Then I introduced Thaddeus. He walked in like a man who'd done this 30 times before lunch. He carried a folder the size of a phone book and placed it gently on the table. "I represent Mrs. Dorn," he began. "Today's signing will not proceed as scheduled." He laid out the forged emails, the power of attorney papers they'd reworded after drugging me up, bank activity, phone logs, device IDs, every detail, neatly cross-referenced, time-stamped, undeniable. Malis tried to speak. Thaddeus lifted a finger and continued. "Additionally, here is the clause from Mr. Leighton Dorn's last will and testament," he said, reading aloud. "Any person found to be coercing or manipulating my wife, Rowena, in regard to her place of residence or property rights shall be disqualified from inheritance." The room dropped into stillness, a silence you can only earn when the truth has done its job. I stood, not to make a scene, but to reclaim gravity. "I never signed anything," I said, voice level, "and both of you are trespassing." Malis's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The notary cleared her throat. "This proceeding is nullified." Malis leaned forward. "You don't understand, Mom. We were protecting you. You don't know how lonely you've looked since Dad." I cut her off, cold as January. "You didn't protect me. You stole the table I raised you on, the house I held your father's hand in, and you tried to bury me while I was still breathing. I'm taking it all back." She sat back like I'd hit her. Brenner reached for her arm, but she pulled away. They left in silence, Malis's heels clicking with less certainty than usual. Brenner followed like a shadow, unsure of its source. I stayed in that room after they were gone. I stood there, alone but not small, surrounded by evidence and dust and the faint scent of printed paper. The chair creaked beneath me as I sat again, not to rest, but to remain. I had been invisible long enough. They finally saw me, and this time they couldn't look away. 3 days after the confrontation, I walked back into my house like I was visiting someone else's memory. The furniture had been rearranged, cushions I hadn't picked sat where mine used to be, and the rug under my feet didn't hold the familiar creases. But what startled me most was how sterile it all felt. I ran my fingers along the kitchen counter, pausing at the corner where Leighton once spilled coffee every single morning. "Everything is where it used to be," I whispered to no one. And yet, Nothing is. The house was mine again, legally, physically, undeniably, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like I had inherited a shell of something once sacred. No word came from Melis, not a call, not a text. Brenner, silent. Isolde had vanished, probably tucked away somewhere. She could pretend none of this ever happened. The phone didn't ring. The mail brought nothing but flyers and bills. The quiet was suffocating and oddly merciful. I didn't want apologies. I wanted them to sit with their choices, and they were. That afternoon, Thaddeus emailed me a scanned copy of Leighton's will. I'd seen it before, but this time he'd highlighted a specific clause. My eyes locked onto the sentence. Any party found manipulating Rowena's living arrangements shall forfeit all rights to inheritance. There it was, plain, undeniable. They hadn't just been cruel, they had been reckless. I printed the page and set it on the coffee table. Then I sat across from it like it was Leighton himself. I didn't cry. I just nodded once. He'd tried to protect me, even from beyond. And for once, the law stood beside me instead of over me. Later that evening, I found myself holding an old photograph of Melis, age 6, sitting on the front porch with a gap-toothed grin, pigtails loose from recess. I remembered that morning. I'd braided her hair before school, humming quietly while she squirmed and asked if she could skip gym class. I held that image against the woman who had tried to erase me. I taught you right from wrong, I said aloud, the room cold and still. I raised you better than this. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even anger. It was grief. The kind that doesn't wail, but lingers like smoke long after the fire is gone. The locks had been changed again, this time by me. The keys jingled in my coat pocket, freshly cut. I opened the front door without flinching. My bedroom still smelled like her perfume, and I stripped the sheets the moment I stepped inside. I folded them with mechanical care, stacking them beside the donation bin. Then I opened the drawer where I kept my paperwork, restored each file to its original folder, and set my tea mug, my actual mug, the one with the small chip near the handle, back in its place beside the kettle. Ownership wasn't loud. It was subtle. It was returning what never should have been moved. And yet, something inside me was quiet, not peaceful, not content, just hollow, as if I'd won a war and come home to ruins. I stood at the window in the living room, the one facing the maple tree Leighton and I planted on our second anniversary. It had grown lopsided, always leaning toward the sun. I envied it. It didn't care if it looked unbalanced. It just grew where the light was. They tried to erase me, I said in my head, but I outlived the erasure. I turned away from the window, walked to the dining table, sat in the chair where I used to grade papers, fold laundry, listen to Melis rehearse her college interviews. The seat across from me was empty, and though the dust had finally settled in this house, the air still carried the weight of everything they took and left behind. They're gone now. But the emptiness they left behind still sits at the dinner table. The phone rang just after breakfast. While I was washing a chipped mug I hadn't touched in months. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered anyway. Mrs. Dorn, this is Maya Givens from the Palmetto Ledger. I'm a local reporter, financial ethics beat. A national blog just picked up your story. They've named Melis and Brenner directly. I'd like to quote you if you're open to a comment. I said nothing for a moment, letting the water run over my fingers. I hope the truth teaches them what I couldn't, I replied, then hung up before she could ask anything else. Later that week, I attended a community brunch hosted by the local council. Nothing fancy, chicken salad on croissants and strong coffee in foam cups. But they'd reserved a table for me up front. One of the chairs bore a handwritten place card, reserved for family. I didn't remove it. I ate alone. Not in sorrow, but in something steadier. Peace doesn't always feel warm. It just feels quiet. Walking home through the park, I passed the old fountain where Melis used to throw pennies as a child. I paused when I heard a little boy's voice call out, "Grandma!" My head turned before I could stop it, but the child ran straight past me and into the arms of Isolde. She sat on a bench, scarf tied tight, sunglasses too large. Her back was ramrod straight as the boy climbed into her lap. They looked picture perfect, staged even. It was the first time I'd seen her since everything fell apart, and I realized she now lived 2 streets over. Not in my home, because it wasn't hers to begin with, but still close enough to pretend her world hadn't collapsed. I kept walking. I didn't need her to see me. That afternoon, I sat across from Thaddeus again. He handed me the final paperwork, several copies of it, all clean, notarized, and irreversible. The house, my house, was no longer mine. It now belonged to the Leighton Dorn Foundation, a scholarship fund set up to help elderly women forced out of their homes through manipulation or coercion. The first grant would be awarded this fall. Thaddeus looked at me. "Yeah, sure?" I nodded. "Let them fight over what's no longer theirs." He signed the last page and slid it into a folder. I felt something lift off me, not like freedom, but like finality, like when the last guest leaves a funeral and you're just left with folding chairs and silence. At home, I sat by the window and watched dust curl through the light. I thought about everything they'd taken, my space, my voice, my sense of place, and realized I'd lost something else, something harder to name. It wasn't the house. It was the illusion that I was needed. They'd made sure I felt like I didn't matter. But what stung more was realizing I'd believed them. Still, the floor was solid beneath my feet. The room was mine, even if the deed was not. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote a list. Names of women I'd met in the facility, questions to ask, contacts to build. I had work to do. "If I couldn't keep them from stealing from me," I whispered, "I'll help the next woman stop them sooner." That evening, I made dinner for one and poured a glass of red, not to celebrate, just to honor what survived. I toasted the empty chair across from me, not with resentment, but with resolve. They'll live with the house. I'll live with the reason it's no longer theirs. It was a Thursday afternoon, gray and still, when Miley showed up at my apartment door. I hadn't given her the address. She stood there with no makeup, dark circles under her eyes, like bruises she couldn't cover. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't apologize. She just looked at me and said, "I saw the article. I didn't expect it to end like this. Neither had I, really." I stepped aside without a word. She walked in like she didn't know where to stand. The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a kitchenette. She hovered near the bookshelf and looked everywhere but at me. I motioned to the small kitchen table. She sat. We didn't speak for a full minute. Then softly, she said, "I don't even know how to start." I poured 2 glasses of water, placed one in front of her, then sat down. "I'm not expecting anything from you," I said. "So start wherever you can." She folded her hands and tried to speak, but the words caught. A half apology dripped from her mouth, more like a regret than a confession. I didn't interrupt. I didn't hand her excuses. I let the silence do its work. When she finally looked up, her eyes glossy, I leaned back. Anger faded, I told her. The moment I realized I didn't need you to do better, I just needed me to stop waiting. She wept then, not loud, not theatrical, just tears sliding down a face I used to know better than my own. I reached for the tissue box on the counter and placed one by her hand. I didn't touch her, not out of cruelty, out of truth. Some gaps can't be bridged with gestures. We sat for a long time. You didn't just lose a house, I said finally. You lost a witness to your better self, the person who held your history and still loved you anyway. Her voice cracked. Do you think I could ever earn it back? I looked at her, not through her, not past her, but into her. Maybe, I said. But not through me, she nodded. That was all there was. She left not long after. That evening, I stopped by Enid's house. She waved me up like she always did. Iced tea already poured, cushions fluffed on the porch swing. We didn't speak about Malus. Instead, she asked me about the scholarship paperwork, how the garden in my building was doing, whether I'd started baking again. Then, as the sun lowered behind her hedges, she said, You were the quietest fighter I've ever seen, Ro. You didn't throw one punch and still knocked them all out. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was kind. I wasn't fighting, I said. I was surviving. She nodded. Same thing these days. The next morning, a certified envelope arrived. The final confirmation of the property transfer. The last legal page in the last chapter of that house. I placed it in a small metal box I kept beneath my bed. On the lid, written in black marker, were 4 words. For clarity, not closure. I didn't lock the box. Some things aren't meant to be shut away. We were a family once. Now, we are a lesson. And sometimes, that has to be enough. 3 months had passed since the final signature, and I still walked slower when I reached the front porch of the house. Not mine anymore, not legally, but the new board of the foundation allowed me to visit when I wanted. They even left my name engraved on a brass plate near the garden entrance. Founder. It made me smile once, just once. Inside, the guest room sat empty, no linen set, no scent of lavender lotion, no boxes, no plastic-wrapped furniture, just light from the window and a breeze that moved the curtains gently. As I stood there, I realized the room had never looked so honest, unclaimed, untouched, just as it should have been. There were things I didn't take when I left. The dining table with its worn center from too many hot dishes laid out in haste. The family portraits where my face had aged year after year beside people who no longer called. The rocking chair where Leighton used to sit, tapping his foot while he read. Some things don't belong to you anymore, even if they carry your fingerprints, even if they remember your weight. What I did keep was tucked away in a small cedar chest in my apartment. A letter from Leighton, written the day before he started chemotherapy. A photo of Malus when she was 5, standing in a yellow raincoat 2 sizes too big. A printed copy of the court judgment, my name circled in red ink by my lawyer. I'd asked him to do that. Just so I never forget, I told him. Proof that I existed, fully, quietly, and rightly. My new home sat near the sea. I could hear the waves on the wind some mornings if I opened both windows and held my breath. The building had a community garden and a little classroom where I taught basics of elder rights every other Thursday. I didn't tell my story. I didn't need to. I taught the lesson, and they understood what it meant. One night, I sat at the small desk beneath my window and pulled out a sheet of stationery I hadn't used in years. I wrote Mayless a letter, not to guilt her, not to fix anything, just to say what I never had the space to say aloud. You lost more than you stole, and I gave more than you'll ever understand. I folded it once, then I burned it in a dish near the open window, watching the paper curl into itself and vanish. The next day, I visited the foundation building. They had installed a polished bronze wall with names carved in rows. At the very top was Leighton's. Below it, mine. Rowena Dorn, guardian of dignity. I stood in front of it for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't touch the name. I simply let it live there, unspoken but real. They tried to take everything, but I kept what mattered, and I'm still standing. The house welcomed me like it had been holding its breath. Nothing had changed. Same creaky spot near the pantry, same stack of unread magazines by the couch, but everything felt different. I set the suitcase down in the front hallway and let the silence settle. No alerts, no missed calls, no new texts from Valora. For the first time in years, I didn't check for one. I unpacked slowly over the next few days. Not just clothes, but everything I'd carried back from that yacht. Documents, hard truths, a spine that had grown itself back without asking permission. By Wednesday, I was organizing the drawer in the hallway credenza when I found it. A small, folded note wedged between an old envelope and a forgotten grocery list. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, neat, purposeful. Don't fight for a seat, build your own table. I had no memory of when he gave it to me. Maybe it was tucked inside a birthday card or handed off after some forgettable family dinner where I'd felt invisible and he had noticed. I sat with the paper for a long while. The next morning, my phone rang. The name surprised me. Maya, Valora's niece, 23, whip smart, just out of grad school, always the quiet one in the corner who watched everything and said nothing. I hope I'm not crossing a line, she said, but I've been thinking about the trip, about you. I waited. You're the only one in the family who built something yourself, not inherited, not married into. You made it. I didn't speak. I'm applying for this business mentorship program, and I wondered, could you look over my application? My answer was simple. Yes. Legacy, I realized, starts quietly. A week later, I hosted Sunday brunch. Nothing formal, just eggs, toast, fresh strawberries, and people who had earned the right to sit at my table. Lyle made the coffee. Callista brought lemon bars. Ronald showed up with his wife, and I gave them the sunniest seat by the window. I didn't try to fill the house. I didn't extend an invite to everyone with the last name Preston, just the ones who knew how to sit at a table and really talk. Not everyone needs to come, I told Lyle as he poured the coffee. Just the ones who belong by spirit, not blood. He nodded and kissed my temple. I had traded legacy for truth, and it fit better. Later that afternoon, as I was rearranging the dining room bookshelves, I found myself thinking about what Valora might have said if she had ever apologized. Maybe she would have blamed pressure or tradition or that false narrative of protecting the family name, and I'd have said, only to myself, never to her, I forgive you, but I don't need you to say it, because some peace isn't shared. It's claimed. The dining table we sat around that day wasn't the one from Lyle's parents' house or the one Valora had tried to curate around social status. It was mine, picked out secondhand, refinished by a woman who learned to shape things instead of beg for a place. There was no toast that day, no speech, just conversation, real, unscripted, full of pauses and tangents and laughter that didn't need a camera. I looked around that room at the people who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And I smiled. This seat was never given. I built it. Looking back, I didn't win because I yelled the loudest. I didn't win because I fought dirty. I won because I remembered who I was, and I refused to be erased. If you're watching this and you've ever felt pushed aside by the people who should have protected you, know this. Silence can be a strategy, but truth is the loudest thing you'll ever carry. You don't need revenge. You need clarity. Maybe you've lived through something similar. Maybe you're still living through it. So I ask you, what would you choose to keep? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like it, I still want to hear from you. Tell me why and where you're tuning in from. 2, let's keep this space honest, supportive, and real. If you want to hear more stories that speak to the heart and honor the strength of quiet voices, hit subscribe. Your story might be next.